Well, hello there, and welcome to Late Night Wine University. I've been teaching a basic beverage class for years, which only grazes the subject of wine, and I usually ask my students if they would be interested in learning a little bit more in a non-judgmental environment, and I always get a resounding yes. So this is actually my first stab at demystifying a very dense subject. Wine is an alcoholic beverage that's made from fermenting grapes. It's been around since about 6000 BC. Ask any room full of people with little or no wine knowledge to categorize wine in two basic ways. They always tell you red and white, and then they ask for a cookie. I could argue that they're hurting Rosé's feelings, and also ignoring some other arguable ways to categorize wine, such as sparkling, still, dessert. But what I'm going to argue instead is that we should start with Old World and New World. This is an interesting way to compare and contrast different wines. Old World winemaking tends to stress tradition. New World winemaking emphasizes innovation and technology. Old World tends to emphasize place or terroir. New World tends to emphasize the grape, often referred to as a varietal, or even increasingly more often, the winemaker. Terroir is just a fancy French word for which there actually is no literal English translation. It means more than just the dirt. It's everything about the environment of the wine that influenced it while it was being grown. So that's the soil, that's the climate, but it's also the angle of the sun, it's the grade of the slope. All of these different things, because the whole idea of Old World winemaking is that you're literally drinking the place. Old World means Europe. That's France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Portugal. New World means not Europe. So yes, it's the US, but it's also South America, South Africa, Australia. Now keep in mind, almost every country makes some type of wine. I've had Chinese wine, I've had Indian wine. Everybody's getting into the wine thing. I just figured we would use some of the most famous wine regions in the world as a reference point. Most Old World wines are named after regions or places: Bordeaux, Burgundy, Chianti, Rioja. Most New World wines are named after the grape. So Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Riesling, Malbec, these are grapes. But while Old World and New World winemaking styles differ, are often in direct opposition to one another, there are some similarities as well. Both of these wines have a region. Both of them are made from grapes. All of them have a winemaker, and most of them have a vintage. This information appears on the wine label, and we're going to learn how to read that. The more specific the information on the label is, the more high in quality the wine is assumed to be. Assumptions in wine, however, much like assumptions in life, are not always all they're cracked up to be. Now let's go back to your red and your white. So red wine is made from red or black grapes, and they're actually usually different purplish shades. White grapes come in a lovely variety of yellow or green shades. The color of the wine comes from the skins, not the flesh of the grapes. Rosé wine is actually not usually a mix of red and white base wines. It's typically made from red grapes, but the wine is only going to have a little bit of contact with those skins as opposed to prolonged contact, and that's what gives it its lovely pink or salmon shade. When we're talking about our reds and our whites, we're typically talking about still wine, the kind of wine you drink at dinner or just by its own damn self. We mentioned sparkling wine, however. The most famous member of the sparkling wine category is champagne. Champagne is a sparkling wine that is made in a very specific place, according to a very specific method, often referred to imaginatively as the champagne method, from pretty specific grapes. There are other types of sparkling wines, however, such as Spumante, Cava, Prosecco, and they matter too. Keep in mind, CO2 is a natural byproduct of fermentation, so one would hope that the bubbles in your sparkler are actually a product of that natural process rather than something that's been added or forced later. The dessert wine category. These are wines that are typically served after dinner with dessert or in place of it. They're a little bit sweeter. They're also a little bit stronger typically. Dessert wines happen in a couple of different ways, and we're not going to get into those in a lot of detail. If you're not in fine dining, you may not have a lot of exposure to these guys, but they're definitely worth checking out. Sometimes the wines end up a little bit sweeter just by letting them hang on the vine a little bit longer and doing their own thing, or even letting them freeze, hence ice wine and late harvest wine. Then there are wines such as your ports, sherries, and madeiras that are actually fortified with additional booze, which stops the fermentation process and results in something with more alcohol and more residual sugar. When we go on our whirlwind tour around the most famous wine regions, we'll learn how certain grapes are associated to certain regions, or how the same grape produced in two completely different regions can taste completely different, can be a completely different expression of the same thing. But first, we're going to learn how to drink the stuff.